The hospital ship Nightingale Mercy floated silently in deep space, its white hull marked with glowing red crosses, visible even from afar, a universal symbol of healing and peace. For years, it had traveled between war-torn star systems, treating soldiers and civilians alike, without question, without sides. On board, Dr. Elara Miles stood at the observation deck, watching the endless stars drift past. Once, she had been Earth's most brilliant military strategist, a genius who had turned the tide in wars with nothing but maps and logic. But war had taken too much from her, her brother, her conscience, her sleep, so she left it all behind, and chose healing over hurting, life over destruction. She now spent her days treating wounds instead of inflicting them, speaking softly to patients instead of issuing orders. That morning, things felt off. The ship's AI had flagged a faint disturbance on the edge of their radar flicker, maybe a cloaked vessel or a glitch. Elara reported it to the bridge, but the captain reassured her it was likely cosmic debris. Still, Elara couldn't shake the unease. She made her way to the medical bay, checking on patients, when suddenly the entire ship shook with a deep, echoing thud. Alarms screamed to life. The red emergency lights painted the white corridors in crimson. Breach on deck 4. Someone shouted over the comms. The shaking grew worse. Screams followed. Then another impact stronger. Shields were down. Systems offline. The Nightingale Mercy was under attack. Lara sprinted through the chaos, helping patients out of their beds, guiding staff to the escape pods. Attackers gave no warning, no demands, no identification. Whoever they were, they had fired on a neutral hospital ship act condemned in every known law across the galaxy. She reached the main terminal and watched in horror as whole sections were ripped away. Vacuum claimed entire wings of the ship. Dozens were gone in seconds. With shaking hands, she triggered the distress beacon. "This is Dr. Elara Miles of the Nightingale Mercy. We are under attack. Coordinates transmitting. Please respond. We are unarmed. Repeat, unarmed." Static. Then the signal connected. Somewhere far away, someone had heard. But the ship's core was unstable now. The reactor exposed. Fire licked the walls of the command center as the captain yelled for everyone to abandon ship. Elara refused. There were still patients trapped. She ran back, ignoring smoke and the distant sound of metal twisting. She managed to reach the last bay just as emergency shutters locked in place, sealing off the corridor behind her. A nurse, crying, forced her toward the final escape pod. "We can't save them," the nurse whispered. "But you can make sure this isn't forgotten." Elara hesitated, then stepped inside. The pod launched just as the Nightingale Mercy began to break apart behind her. Through the tiny viewport, she saw explosions bloom like silent flowers in the void. Her ship, her home, was gone, floating alone in darkness. The pod drifted into the stars. She felt the weight of 1,000 lost lives pressing on her chest, but something else burned in her too, a fire she thought she had buried long ago. Someone had attacked a human hospital ship, and whether the galaxy knew it yet or not, they had just awakened the most dangerous mind in human history. The escape pod floated through cold space for nearly 4 days, its systems barely keeping Elara alive. She had no idea where she was going, only that the emergency beacon was active and sending out a signal. Her body was weak, her mind foggy, but her thoughts were sharp. She kept replaying the last moments of the Nightingale Mercy, the screams, the fire, the silence. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw faces of patients and staff who had trusted her, who had looked at her in their final moments. She had given everything to live in peace, to help, to heal, but someone had decided that even a hospital ship was a target, and that made her feel something she hadn't felt in years, the burning urge to fight not with weapons, but with her mind. On the 5th day, a Terran patrol ship finally picked up the signal. They brought her aboard carefully, not knowing what they would find. She was dehydrated, bruised, but alive. News of the Nightingale Mercy's destruction had already reached Earth, and when the crew realized who they had rescued, the entire ship went silent. Dr. Ilara, Miles' war hero, strategist, peacemaker, was back. She didn't say much on the way back to Earth. Only asked for data, fleet movement reports, political updates, and the raw footage from the hospital ship's black box. The crew gave it to her without question. They could see it in her eyes. Something had changed. When she arrived on Earth, the Terran Coalition High Command met her personally. They offered condolences, honored the fallen, and asked her the one question she knew would come: will you return to service? She stared at them across the long table, remembering why she had left in the first place. The war councils, the blood, the sleepless nights of planning how to outthink enemies who had no care for mercy. She had walked away from it all, thinking that if she stepped back, others would too. But the destruction of the Nightingale Mercy proved otherwise. There were still those in the galaxy who respected only power. And now they would learn what true power looked like, not brute force, but cold, brilliant precision. She agreed to help, but under strict terms. No civilian casualties, no full-scale war, and absolute command over all non-military operations related to retaliation. The council hesitated. Then they agreed. They knew what she was capable of. Her first move was simple silence. No announcement, no revenge threats, no speeches. Instead, she vanished from the public eye and moved into a hidden intelligence base deep in the mountains of New Europa. She requested a hand-picked team: analysts, historians, data engineers, communications experts. No soldiers. Every day, she sat before massive screens filled with thousands of streams news channels. Intercepted messages, trade logs, fleet reports, and whispers across the dark corners of the galactic net. She studied the patterns, searching not just for enemies, but for cracks, for fears, for weaknesses. While governments argued and the public mourned, Ilara was already building her plan. Not to destroy the attackers, but to expose them. Meanwhile, across the stars, tensions rose. The Core 3 Dominion's secretive alliance of alien clans was the main suspect. Their ships had been near the area. They had the technology, the silence, the motive, but they denied everything, claiming they were being framed. Some believed them, others did not. Ilara didn't care about what people believed. She cared about what was true. Now she was close to finding it. Weeks passed, and her team unearthed a series of encrypted messages, sent days before the attack messages between known Core 3 merchant lords and a shadow group known as the Arathi Hands. Smugglers and weapons dealers who had no flag but plenty of credits. They spoke of an example of striking a symbol of weakness. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to act. Ilara leaked just enough of this information to the media, all of it, just fragments, enough to spark fear and doubt, enough to let the galaxy start asking questions. Distant systems, planets began to debate their ties with the Core theory. Trade slowed. Allies hesitated. That's when Ilara made her real move. She sent a private message to the leaders of the Core 3. Not a threat, not an accusation, just a copy of the Nightingale Mercy's final transmission. Ilara's voice, calm and terrified, calling for help while the ship burned around her. It played on repeat. No words, no demands, just a memory. The Core 3 didn't respond. Soon after, they began shuffling fleets in secret, moving ships away from certain borders, increasing security near trade hubs. They were afraid, not of war, but of what was coming. Ilara saw it all. Every fleet movement, every political shift, every crack widening. And then she struck again. This time, she hijacked a major galactic broadcaster weekly council debate feed that aired live to billions, Mid-session, the feed cut to black. 10. To the image of the Nightingale Mercy burning, followed by a slow, haunting scroll of names. Every soul lost aboard. At the end, Ilara's voice spoke a single sentence. "We remember." Then silence. The broadcast ended. It caused an uproar. Debates froze. Protests erupted. Even some Core 3 citizens began to question what their leaders had done. Lara didn't attack them. She made them see. The Core 3 couldn't spin it. Couldn't hide it. And behind closed doors, fractures began to form. One clan pulled out of the Dominion entirely, claiming they had no knowledge of the attack and would not stand by any empire that struck at the innocent. More followed. Core 3 Council began to turn on itself. Lara watched it all unfold with cold patience. She didn't need a fleet. She didn't need firepower. She was dismantling an empire with the truth, or at least with the story people now believed was the truth, and sometimes that was even more powerful. The Terran Council was shocked at her effectiveness. Some feared her, others respected her, but no one denied her results. In just 1 month, she had shaken a galactic power without firing a shot. But she wasn't done. In secret, she began building a network not of spies or soldiers, but of voices, survivors, medics, neutral captains, diplomats who had witnessed the cost of silence. She gave them platforms, pushed their stories into every corner of known space. People began to talk. Then they began to act. Protests turned into policy changes. Embassies cut ties. Core 3 ambassadors were expelled. All of it without Ilara giving a single command. Up behind her calm face, something dark stirred. Victory brought her no peace, only the memory of those she couldn't save. She stayed up late, watching the stars from her station window, wondering how much of herself she had already lost. She had come back to fight for peace, but peace had become a battlefield, and she knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, the ones who ordered the attack were still free, still hidden, but they had made a fatal mistake. They had left her alive. And now, the most brilliant mind in human history was thinking again, not in anger, not in hate, but with a clear, sharp purpose. She would not stop, not until every lie was brought into the light, not until every name lost. Aboard the Nightingale, Mercy was remembered, and when she was done, the galaxy would know a new kind of power, the power of a mind rekindled. Ilara Miles sat alone in the quiet command center deep beneath the mountains of New Europa, surrounded by glowing screens filled with raw data, news, feeds, encrypted messages, and satellite scans. The room was silent, but her mind was not. Every piece of information was a puzzle, every whisper a clue. She had become something more than a strategist. Now she was a weaver of influence. A quiet storm shaping the galaxy without lifting a weapon. After the hijacked broadcast showing the destruction of the Nightingale Mercy and the list of the dead, the galaxy had changed. Trust had been broken, not just between empires, but between rulers and their people. Protests had grown louder. Fear had taken root in systems once stable, and alliances that had stood for decades now trembled. The Core 3 Dominion was at the center of it all, and Ilara's soft but clear voice echoed in the minds of many. But she knew pressure alone was not enough. Fear faded. Outrage cooled. What she needed now was momentum, something that moved not just minds, but entire systems. So, she changed her strategy. She turned to stories. Her team, now known as the Veiled Division, began quietly pushing out personal accounts, survivors of other Core 3 incidents, hidden evidence of war crimes buried in sealed archives, testimonies from exiles who had fled Core 3 space in silence. Each story was fact-checked, clean, and pushed through neutral channels, never traced back to her. At first, they seemed like scattered tales, small, sad, almost forgotten. But then the pattern grew. Systems that once ignored these whispers began to connect the dots. Leaders demanded answers from the Core Three, and when none came, suspicion hardened into belief. The most effective strike came when Ilara's team obtained footage from a smuggler who had been passing through a fringe system 2 days before the hospital ship attack. It showed a Core 3 battleship cloaked, waiting in the shadows of a dead moon, exactly where the Nightingale Mercy had passed. It wasn't absolute proof, but it was enough. Kayla leaked only part of the footage, letting the galaxy reach its own conclusion. Kayla, even those who once defended the Core 3 began to doubt them. The Dominion's voice in the Galactic Council grew quiet. Some of their trading partners began to freeze contracts, citing moral responsibility. Ilara watched it all unfold without showing emotion. She could feel the shift, the way the galaxy was listening, not just to her, but to the truth, carefully guided by her hand. Core 3 tried to fight back. They sent counter-stories, paid off reporters, and staged friendly media appearances, but it only made them look more desperate, and Ilara was already a step ahead. She released a carefully edited recording of a private Core 3 meeting, intercepted weeks earlier, where leaders coldly discussed the need to send a message to the Terrans. No names, no details, just cold words and silence. Afterward, the people heard what they wanted to hear, and what they heard chilled them. The Core 3 Dominion was no longer just an empire, it had become a symbol of cruelty. At the same time, Ilara had been working on something new. She began funding rebel voices, not fighters, but teachers, artists, and young leaders on planets under Core 3 control. These people didn't start riots or wars. They started conversations. They spoke of freedom, justice, and peace. Her team helped them push their messages to millions, bypassing Core 3 sensors using darknet channels and pulse-burst satellites. These messages grew like sparks in dry grass, and soon, small protests began to rise in Core 3 space, not against humanity, but against their own rulers. A whisper had become a roar. But Ilara knew the danger was growing. The Core 3 leadership, cornered and humiliated, could strike again, and this time they might not wait, so she acted first. She arranged for a massive humanitarian fleet trio, hospital ships, cargo carriers with food, medicine, and engineers to gather at the border of Core 3 space. They came not with weapons, but with aid. And as they moved into orbit around nearby neutral worlds, they began broadcasting live footage of their work. Millions watched medics helping the sick, engineers fixing broken water systems, and Terran doctors treating Core 3 refugees who had fled their own leaders. It was a bold move. The Core 3 called it propaganda. Ilara called it truth, and the galaxy agreed with her. One by one, systems once loyal to the Core 3 turned away. Some withdrew from trade. Some refused to allow Core 3 ships through their space. Others sent their own aid to join the Terran fleet. The Core 3 Dominion was bleeding economically, politically, and morally. But Ilara was not finished. She made one final move that shocked even her own allies. She invited every major news network in the galaxy to a live event in Terran space, a memorial service for the Nightingale Mercy. Not in a building, but in space. A new monument floated in orbit over Earth, a silent beacon shaped like the hospital ship, with the names of the dead carved into a slowly rotating ring of light. The event was broadcast live. Billions watched. Survivors spoke. Families cried. And Ilara, dressed in white, gave a short, powerful message. This was not an act of war. This was an act of fear, and fear is defeated by truth. Her words spread across the galaxy like a wave. There were no threats, no accusations, just truth, pain, and memory. That was the final spark. Within days, one of the Core 3 ruling clans broke away and declared neutrality, demanding an investigation into the attack. Other clans followed, frightened by the collapse of their image. The Dominion was no longer united. The once feared empire had been shattered by a doctor who had never fired a single shot. Kayla Rue stood alone that night, watching the stars from her station window. Her plan had worked, but it had come at a cost. She hadn't slept in days. The weight of every choice hung heavy on her shoulders. She had used pain to fight power, turned truth into a weapon, and lit the galaxy with the flame of memory. But she also knew this wasn't the end. The attackers still hid in shadow. The real masterminds had yet to be named. But now they would have to crawl through a galaxy that no longer believed their lies. Ilara Miles, the mind once lost to peace, had returned not to destroy, but to reveal. And in doing so, she had become something greater than a strategist. She had become the voice behind a movement, the whisper that roared across the stars. The Core 3 fracture did not begin with an explosion or an assassination. It began in silence. Deep inside, a cold black chamber, known only to the highest circle of Core 3 leadership. Qua, where 6 clan lords gathered in a secret conclave to face what none of them wanted to admit. Their empire was falling apart. For generations, the Dominion had ruled by fear, their military unmatched, their alliances carefully bought or bullied into submission. But now the stars whispered rebellion, and whole systems were turning away. The destruction of the Nightingale Mercy had been meant to send a message to humanity that weakness would not be tolerated near Core 3 borders, but instead it had shattered the very foundation of their power, for they had not counted on Dr. Ilara Miles, a woman of mind and memory, whose strategy was not war, but exposure. The Core 3 lords stared at one another in dim light, none daring to speak first, till Lord Siren of the Velsha clan rose, his golden robes flowing behind him, accused Lord Jock of orchestrating the hospital ship attack without the council's approval. The room erupted. Voices clashed like swords, each lord trying to protect their own interests while pushing blame elsewhere. But it was already too late. The cracks were visible, not just in the words, but in the trembling hands, the hesitant glances, the distant reports of worker strikes on colony planets, the sudden defections of regional governors. One of the 6, Lady Crithin of the Oric Dai clan, left the chamber in silence before the session even ended. Her ships already en route to establish a neutral zone in protest of the growing chaos. Ilara had predicted it, though she had not expected the speed of collapse. Her team had intercepted dozens of internal Core 3 transmissions over the last week, some encrypted, others panicked and sloppy, all pointing to the same conclusion. The Dominion was turning on itself. She didn't need to strike anymore. She only needed to listen, to watch, and to nudge. On the planet Dressery Prime, a major Core 3 industrial world, workers refused to load military transports, citing moral concerns over recent attacks. Protests flared in the streets, and when soldiers were sent to suppress them, whole districts erupted into riot. Lara made sure the footage spread everywhere of Core 3 soldiers turning their rifles on unarmed civilians. Cayman, of mothers shielding children, of banners that read, in both alien script and human standard, "We are not your weapon." Within days, other worlds joined. Core 3 families began to question the lies told to them, especially the story that the Nightingale Mercy had been a hidden military threat. When leaked footage from a refugee freighter showed dying children on the burning hospital ship, the truth hit harder than any bomb. But as rebellion grew, danger also followed. A splinter faction known as the Void Talon, made up of Core 3 extremists, rose in response, blaming Ilara for the collapse and vowing to restore the Dominion through violence. They began targeting neutral systems and refugee convoys, using stolen codes and stealth ships. Lara, realizing the risk, responded not with force, but with coordination. She reached out to former enemy small fleets, mercenaries, even providers offering temporary contracts to defend humanitarian zones. They agreed, not for loyalty, but for something stranger, respect. Ilara's name had become a signal of purpose. She had no rank, no flag, but her word carried weight across sectors. Still, the Void Talon struck hard, ambushing a medical ship outside the Vester Belt and leaving nothing but silence behind. Ilara was shaken. She knew they wanted to draw her out, to force her into making a mistake. But instead of hiding, she made another broadcast, not angry, not defensive, just clear. She read out the names of the fallen, then paused and asked a single question to the galaxy. If mercy is a weakness, then what is strength? That single line was replayed on thousands of channels, across enemy lines, even in parts of Core 3 space. And something shifted again. More Core 3 began to speak out, professors, priests, even a retired admiral who released a memoir admitting that the Dominion had authorized the hospital ship's destruction. It wasn't just a fracture, now it was a collapse in slow motion. Inside the Dominion's core worlds, clans began pulling their fleets back, protecting only their own territories, no longer willing to defend the whole. Trade routes snapped, shipyards shut down. A power vacuum formed, and in it, opportunists rose, some for peace, some for conquest. Ilara feared what would come next. The fall of an empire always left danger behind, and the Void Talon was only one threat. But she had planned for this, quietly. Over the months, she had helped prepare a network of unity movements, small groups in various systems, trained not to fight, but to stabilize. Teachers, doctors, former diplomats, sent ahead to help build new governance where the Core 3 grip had failed. And when the first clan house, Siren, formally dissolved its loyalty to the Dominion and declared a worldwide council of renewal, her teams were already in place to help. Lara watched all of it from her command center, eyes tired but unblinking. Her voice had never risen. Her hands had never pulled a trigger, but her mind had lit the fuse that brought down an empire. Still, something bothered hers, something unfinished. In the background of every intercepted message, every confession, one name never appeared, the one who had truly ordered the destruction of the Nightingale Mercy. Lord Jock had been blamed, but Ilara knew better. He was too visible, too careless. The real orchestrator was still hidden, someone deep in the Core 3 web, still pulling strings. She needed proof, not suspicion. That night, she met with her lead analyst, a quiet man named Tovan, who had been tracking message routes and unusual account activity across Core 3 systems. He had found something strange, a string of unregistered cargo haulers that had made trips to a supposedly abandoned moon in the Azari drift far from any known colony. The cargo, classified. The ownership, disguised through 10 layers of shell accounts. But one name kept appearing in connection with the deliveries. Verithala, former Core 3 intelligence officer, thought dead 10 years ago. Ilara's heart stilled. Verithal was a ghost, a master manipulator who had once run Black Ops for the Dominion and vanished after a scandal involving covert human experimentation. If he was alive, and if he had anything to do with the attack on the hospital ship, then everything so far had been only the beginning. Ilara decided not to wait. She ordered a quiet recon mission to the moon in the Azori Drift. A small stealth vessel, crewed by trusted operatives, left within hours. Ilara watched them go, feeling the weight of a new story beginning. If Verithal was indeed behind the attack, then the fracture of the Core 3 Dominion was only step one in a far darker plan. And the galaxy, still healing from grief and lies, was not yet ready for what lay in the shadows. Lara, the mind who had shaken an empire, faced her greatest test, not just to expose a hidden hand, but to stop a new darkness before it spread like fire through the stars. The fracture was real, the empire dying, But evil did not die with it. And she would not rest until the truth, the whole truth, stood in the light. Ilara Miles stood before the main display wall, her eyes scanning dozens of live feeds, satellite pings, encrypted comms, and quiet whispers from across the stars. But her focus was drawn to one glowing red dot, the moon in the Azori drift, where Verthal was hiding. The ghost of Core 3 intelligence, long thought dead, now rising from the shadows, just as the Dominion fell into ruin. The stealth ship she had sent, Quiet Light, had gone dark 17 hours ago. Last transmission, a scrambled burst containing just 3 words. He is here. That was all Ilara needed. She had expected resistance, a trap even, but she also understood Verwan's, a master of invisible wars. He would not waste energy trying to stop every scout or silence every whisper. He would wait in the dark, building something bigger. And now, Ilara feared that something worse than war was forming in the shadow of the Dominion's collapse. The Core 3 Empire was broken, but not buried, and someone like Vaer could twist its ruins into a new kind of terror. Lara didn't sleep that night. Her mind raced through layers of possibilities: secret fleets, bioweapons, sleeper agents scattered through neutral systems, perhaps even a new ideology that could infect minds faster than ships could fly. She pulled her team together at dawn. Tovin, her analyst, looked pale from worry. Juna, her logistics chief, had already rerouted a relay satellite over the drift to try and recover any signal from Quiet Light. And her newest recruit, a soft-spoken former Core 3 diplomat named Varek, offered a chilling suggestion that the cargo deliveries to the moon weren't weapons, but data cores. If Verthal had access to Dominion intelligence archives, he might possess knowledge powerful enough to blackmail or destabilize entire civilizations. Secrets buried for decades, now possibly awake. Ilara authorized a second mission, not a stealth probe this time, but a small human Core 3 joint strike team drawn from rebel clans who had broken away from the Dominion. Those who still had pride but no faith in the past scouted Operation Dawnzand and gave them one goal: find out what Verthal was doing and stop it before he could unleash it on the galaxy. As they launched, Ilara began reaching out quietly but swiftly to leaders across the fragile alliances forming after the Dominion's collapse. She did not offer promises, only warnings. The war is not over, she told them. The enemy has changed shape, okay? Her words rippled through political circles. Some scoffed, others listened, okay? And a few sent their own agents to investigate, knowing that if Ilara was worried, the threat was real, okay? Meanwhile, the Donzin team reached the moon, and what they found was worse than expected. Beneath the dead rock surface was a vast facility, powered and hidden, built into ancient caverns, rows of server towers humming with energy, laboratories filled with preserved bodies, broken machines, and something more terrifying, a memory core that interfaced directly with living minds. The logs, downloaded just before their signal cut out, revealed part of Vaer's planned Project Ecliptus. The Dominion, long ago, had begun experimenting with ways to preserve tactical brilliance by uploading the minds of their best commanders into digital archives, hoping to simulate their decisions during wars. The project was banned after it caused several breakdowns and one near genocide on a test world. Vaer, it seemed, had taken control of the old project and improved it. Instead of simulations, he was trying to merge fragments of dead minds into world living operatives, creating not soldiers, but walking networks of strategy, memory, and control. If successful, one man could hold the knowledge of 1,000 tacticians, the instincts of entire fleets, and the ability to outthink any opposition. He wasn't building weapons. He was building minds, new leaders, new gods. Lara's fear became certainty. She had to act fast. She knew Vaer wouldn't rush. He would wait for the moment when the galaxy relaxed, when the morning ended. Okay. And then he would strike not with force, but with ideas too complex to resist, agents too sharp to detect, and messages too perfect to disbelieve. She sent out the signal, a silent alarm called Protocol Lantern. It was the final layer of her strategy, a message prepared months earlier to be released only in the event of a mind-based threat. The signal carried a story, not a warning, but a tale about a galaxy that trusted a voice too much and paid the price. It was written like fiction, narrated in calm words, distributed to millions. But hidden within the tale were layers of code, signs that analysts and commanders would understand, a call to remain alert, to question what seemed too perfect, to verify truth with their own eyes. Across systems, old allies of Alara activated hidden protocols. Firewalls were strengthened. Sensitive data was pulled from exposed systems. Recruitment centers ran side checks on all new applicants. The galaxy had learned to listen to her whispers, and now those whispers told them to look for ghosts. But even as the net tightened, Alara knew it might not be enough. Vaer was brilliant, maybe even more than her, and his ambition was not conquest, it was transformation. He believed the Dominion had failed because it trusted ships and fear. He would build an empire of thought. His agents would not wear uniforms or fly war banners. They would teach, lead, inspire, reshape. She needed an edge. She turned to something she had long avoided: her own past. Before the war, before the hospital ship burned, before strategy became her life, Alara had been a cognitive architect, a designer of neural maps. She had walked the edges of consciousness and once developed early systems for memory echo therapy. She had left that behind when it was weaponized by others. But now she reached back, and with her team, she designed a counter-system project, Polaris, where Vaer tried to create minds of many voices. She designed Clarity, software that could detect pattern corruption, false memory layering, and thought synchronization. It couldn't stop an agent already compromised, but it could detect signs before activation. She made it open source, released it quietly, let the galaxy adopt it on its own. Within weeks, several suspected operatives were caught, individuals who had begun to speak in strangely unified phrases, or make impossible predictions, or push for identical policies across very different systems. Vaer was exposed, not entirely, but enough. He reacted quickly. A swarm of misinformation followed, deepfakes of Alara, giving false orders, false footage of her colluding with Core 3 war criminals. Even a fake death broadcast that showed her final words begging for forgiveness. But she had prepared for that too. Her allies confirmed her safety, and she went live across all networks, not to deny the lies, but to ask a question. What do you believe? It was a gamble, but the gamble worked. People had seen her actions, not just her words, her consistency, her refusal to fight with hate. Trust, once earned, could survive storms. Vaer's plan began to unravel. His agents were caught, his facility in the drift shut down by a coordinated strike. But he himself vanished again, leaving only one message in the wreckage: the future does not belong to the strong. It belongs to those who shape thought. This is not the end. Alara read those words and said nothing for a long time. She knew he was right in part. The wars of the future would not be won with ships, but with minds. But she also believed something deeper, something Vaer had forgotten. Minds could be brilliant, but hearts gave them purpose. And that, she knew, was why he would always fail. She didn't chase him. Instead, she returned to her work, healing, rebuilding, helping former enemies speak to each other, and ensuring no empire ever rose again on silence and shadows. Her name became legend, not for battles fought, but for futures shaped. Cross the stars. They called her the mind that changed the stars. Not because she conquered, but because she taught others how to stand, how to think, how to see. And somewhere, far beyond the edge of known space, there thou watched, and began, again. But this time, the galaxy was ready. The galaxy had begun to breathe again, slowly and cautiously, like a patient waking from a long and painful coma. And across the stars, the name of Dr. Elara Miles carried more weight than any flag or throne, not as a warrior or ruler, but as the mind that had reshaped an age, the voice that had cracked the Core 3 dominion and brought light into shadows long ruled by fear. Yet even with peace blooming in scattered systems, something darker stirred beneath the surface, a final echo that had not yet faded, for Verthal, the ghost in the mind stream, had not been stopped, totally scattered, and Elara knew better than to think his ambition had vanished with the fall of his lab on the Izari Drift, in a quiet chamber aboard her flagship, now a diplomatic cruiser named the Verdict of Dawn. Elara listened to the last transmission recovered from Ver's hidden memory banks. A single loop of audio that repeated the words, "The question is not who rules the stars, but who dreams them." And though the voice was calm, almost poetic, it chilled her deeper than any weapon ever had, because it sounded not like a threat, but like belief, like prophecy. And Elara understood then that Ver's war was not about control, it was about changing the way people thought, bending truth until even memory bowed to him. Months passed as she worked with fragile governments and scattered colonies, helping build alliances, not on conquest, but cooperation. But each time a new council formed or a treaty was signed, strange disruptions followed. Key leaders suffered sudden memory gaps. Diplomats began repeating phrases they didn't recall learning, and systems that had never known each other began mirroring policies with eerie precision. And it all pointed to one conclusion: Ver's final plan had been seeded into the minds of others, fragments of him embedded in people across the stars, perhaps hundreds of them, maybe thousands, unaware that their thoughts were not their own, each carrying a sliver of his design, like a sleeper cell of ideology. Elara called it the shard effect, and it became her greatest challenge, not a fleet to defeat or an empire to topple, but an infection of thought, a silent rewriting of identity. And she feared that if it spread unchecked, the galaxy would fall, not with a scream, but with a song sung by those who didn't know they were singing it. To fight this, she returned to the mindscapes she had once sworn never to enter again, diving into the digital blueprints of consciousness and memory, building tools not to erase the shards, but to reveal them, creating scanners and tests that could detect when a mind had been shaped by something foreign and unnatural. But she knew that technology alone would not be enough. Hearts had to be prepared to. And so she traveled from world to world, speaking not as a savior or a scientist, but as a human, sharing the truth of her own struggle, how her faith had been shaken by fire, how she had almost given in to rage when the Nightingale Mercy was destroyed, how she had chosen clarity over vengeance. And slowly, her message began to resonate. Students in distant academies studied her strategies, not for war, but for peacekeeping. Former Core 3 soldiers, now free of Dominion rule, formed councils to watch for signs of mental interference in their own ranks. And poets wrote verses about the doctor who healed minds instead of breaking them. Yet still, Ver's presence lingered. Reports came in of a world deep in the forgotten spiral, a place long untouched by war, where a new leader named Alwyn Dross had risen in only a month, uniting 12 warring clans without bloodshed, preaching a philosophy almost identical to the core of Ver's writings: logic over empathy, future over past, obedience to purpose. Elara went there in person, risking everything. The planet O'Lyrics was lush, peaceful on the surface, its people smiling, its cities clean, and its new leader polite, soft-spoken, articulate. Alwyn welcomed her with kindness, offered tea, spoke of renewal, of efficiency, of eliminating emotional burdens that held societies back. But as Ilara listened, she recognized the cadence, the subtle patterning in his speech, the way he layered questions instead of answers, the exact rhythm Vare had once used when recruiting minds for Project Ecliptus. She did not accuse him. She asked him only one question. "Do you remember your childhood?" Alwyn blinked, paused, then smiled again, but the hesitation had said enough. Ilara requested a private scan and offered herself as the first subject to prove the process was harmless. He agreed. The results were worse than she feared. Alwyn's mind had been altered by a cluster shard, not just containing Vare's ideology, but an actual neural overlay designed to shift identity when exposed to certain stimuli. Lara left the room and broadcast a general warning to all systems. Vare's final strategy was active, and anyone could be carrying it. She expected fear, but instead, something better happened. People chose transparency. Volunteers across thousands of stations stepped forward to be scanned. Communities built trust protocols. Shared memory councils were formed, where neighbors checked in on one another, not for control, but care. Vare had hoped to make them doubt truth. Lara taught them how to protect it. But there was one final piece missing: the core. The master shard. The place or person still holding the original code that allowed Vare to overwrite minds in the first place. Tovin, her analyst, found it buried in a signal pattern disguised as a random pulse near the edge of the Orion line, a region thought uninhabitable due to radiation storms. But Ilara knew better. He had always liked hiding in places people didn't look. Ski took a small team. No warships. Ski, just one vessel. And when they arrived, they found a station, not large, but old, ancient, taps predating even the Dominion, and inside it was a chair, a transmitter, and a preserved brain interface wired into a stream of dark matter particles. Vare was not there, not physically, but a remnant of him was, a thinking ghost, a self-aware code that spoke when she entered. "Hello, Doctor. I was wondering when you'd come." It was not a threat. It was a conversation. He offered her knowledge, partnership, the chance to shape a future where emotion no longer caused war. But she declined. She offered him silence. And then she activated Polaris Prime, the final phase of her mental defense system designed not to destroy, but to neutralize thought manipulation through pure cognitive resonance. A signal that restored minds to their true form. The core melted, not with fire, but with clarity. And the ghost was gone. Ilara returned to her ship, not with triumph, but with peace. The war was over, not because her enemy was dead, but because his ideas had failed to take root. Kea not destroyed him. She had outgrown him. Across the galaxy, stars blinked in silence, and for the first time in decades, peace felt real. People still argued, still struggled, but they did so with their own minds, their own truths. And in the halls of every New World Council, one portrait hung a woman with tired eyes and a calm smile, remembered not for her title or her battles, but for her question. If mercy is weakness, then what is strength? She had answered it not with words, but with action. She was Ilara Miles, Doctor of Destiny, and the stars would never forget.